It's time for the SEC Championship, Georgia versus Alabama. It's a game that Alabama fans have been waiting for 2 years, and Georgia fans want to prove that last year wasn't a fluke. The national championship did not go through Tuscaloosa, and that's a strange thing to happen in modern SEC history. So let's take a look first at the schedules of the two, and you can see that they've played similar teams. Well, not only similar teams, the exact same teams. Georgia has done slightly better against the common competition. They stomped Tennessee at Tennessee. Alabama did do well against Tennessee at home. And you'll recall that Alabama was a second half team for the first half of the season, with the exception of the Texas game, of course, where they kind of fell apart in the second half. But they were a second half team. Georgia is good in both halves, so they've done quite well against common competition. Similar scores, though, for the most part. So let's take an overview of the teams. Alabama comes in at 11-1, ranked number 8 in the nation. Georgia, number 1, almost the entire season. The entire season for the bowl championship rankings. They're 12-0. Power indexes are very similar. Alabama's rated number 6. Actually, there's a mistake on that slide. Georgia is rated number 5, one ahead of Alabama. It's going to be an away game for both teams, but in Atlanta, it's hard to call it an away game. I realize that it's not between the hedges in Atlanta, but for Georgia, the Georgia fans are going to be all around them. They're going to be in the parking lot. They're going to be selling Georgia paraphernalia. So it's kind of a semi-away game and not really a neutral site for them. They've been playing mostly at home this year, especially for their significant wins. 4-0 in away games for Georgia. Again, if you can call this an away game. The significant away win for Alabama was Texas A&M. The significant away win for Georgia, Tennessee Volunteers, and they pretty much trounced them. Total offense ranking, 48 for Alabama versus 6 for Georgia. And that's not odd for Alabama to go up against teams whose total offense ranking is much higher than theirs. In fact, they played LSU, who at the time, the total offense was ranked number 1 in the nation, and it's still in the top 2 or 3. Total defense ranking, number 17 for Alabama, number 9 for Georgia. And you'll see that throughout these numbers, there's hardly an ounce worth of difference between the two teams. When you look at the numbers, sure, 17 versus 9 is 8 slots, but when you take a look at the actual yardage, the average yardage is about 0.10 yards better per play for Georgia, maybe a total of 10 yards per game. So they're very, very close when it comes to statistics. Offense, total points for Alabama, 36. Georgia scores 4 more per game at 40. The defense for Alabama gives up 18 points per game. Georgia gives up 17 points per game. Turnover margin is significant, though. Alabama sitting at +7, Georgia at 0. They don't steal the ball very often, and when they do, they generally, they specifically give it up as many times as they steal it. Penalties per game, a bit of a difference here, but recall that Alabama was very penalty prone. In fact, they had 14 points, I think it was, called back against Texas. That's the difference in the game. Alabama's ranked number 66 in the nation, tied at 6 penalties per game. And you'll see how tight the bandwidth is here between the top teams and the bottom teams, because Georgia averages 4 penalties per game, yet they're tied for 12th in the nation. Average time of possession, a big difference here. Georgia hogs the ball for 33 minutes a game. Alabama takes as much as it gets, just over 30 minutes per game time of possession. Total yards in offense, here's where there's also a bit of a difference, 1,000 yards. Almost 5,000 yards for Alabama, almost 6,000 yards for Georgia this year. Per game, Alabama's at 409. Georgia is close to 500, as the total offense number would imply. Per play, though, they're within a yard of each other. 6.5 roughly for Alabama, 7 1/4 yards per play for Georgia. Defensive total yards, very, very tight. 3,700 given up by Alabama, 3,500 given up by Georgia. Yards per game, very tight. 313 for Alabama, 294 for Georgia. And remember, Alabama has played the top-ranked defense or offense, in the nation. Defensive yards per play, Alabama gives up 4.9, Georgia gives up 4.8. So again, a very, very tight bandwidth there. Let's look at efficiencies and passing. Third down efficiency, Alabama's 12th in the nation, but hold that thought when we look at Georgia's at 49%, almost 50%. Georgia is awesome when it comes to not allowing their opponents to get that first down. They're ranked number 2 in the nation. Opponents only get the first down 27% of the time. Fourth down efficiency, Alabama is 75% on offense. They don't go for fourth down very often. Georgia, on the other hand, gives up a little more than half of their opponents' attempts for first down when it's fourth. Passing ranking, Alabama's at number 57 in the nation. Georgia's pass defense is number 12. Alabama attempts to throw the ball an average of 23 times per game. Georgia faces 31 passes per game, and it makes sense that they would face a little more given that they're ahead in the fourth quarter in most of their games. Yards per game, Alabama passes for 229 yards per game. Georgia gives up 184. Yards per attempt, almost 10 yards per attempt for Alabama. That's an awesome number, but keep that in mind too when we look at Georgia's yards per attempt and yards per completion, 15.5 yards for Alabama. Georgia gives up a paltry 5.6 yards per opponent attempt, and 10 yards per opponent completion. Interceptions thrown, Alabama's thrown 6. That's 1 interception per 47 attempts, meaning about 1 every couple of games. Georgia is tied for 22 in the nation in stealing the ball from the air. They've intercepted the ball 12 times. You'll find out that they're tied with Alabama in the next slide. Alabama has intercepted the ball 12 times. Sacks given up. Earlier in the year, Alabama gave up a plethora of sacks, 38. That puts them almost at the bottom of the nation in terms of giving up their quarterback. Sacks made, Georgia, not all that great. 25, and they're tied for 64th in the nation in terms of sacks, meaning that there are a number of teams between number 1 and number 64, obviously, but there are more than 64 teams. Probably, I think it was about 100 teams. They're towards the bottom in the nation in getting to the opposing quarterback. Passing efficiency for Alabama is 64%. Georgia relies on that great pass defense, allowing an opponent's efficiency at 56%. Now let's turn the tables and look at the Georgia efficiencies and passing offense versus the Alabama defense. Georgia's number 2 in the nation in making that first down when it's third and however long, 57%. Alabama's pretty good at stopping the opponent, 25 in the nation, allowing 34%. Not as good as Georgia's 27%, but certainly up there. Fourth down efficiency, the same as Alabama's. Georgia's 6 for 8, 75%. On the other side of the ball, Alabama rarely gives up a first down when the opponent goes for it. Their opponents have been successful 7 times out of 23 attempts. Passing ranking, Georgia's number 8 in the nation. It's not number 1 like LSU was, but it gives you an indication of what the majority of their offense is. Alabama continues to improve in pass defense. They're number 15 in the nation. Georgia tries to throw the ball 33 times per game, about what Alabama sees on the defensive side as their opponents go for 30 attempts per game. Georgia, a great 311 yards per game. That's why their passing ranking is number 8. They gain a lot of yards. There's going to be a clash here because Alabama only gives up 184 yards. Georgia yards per attempt just below Alabama at 9.35, but the completions are at 13 yards per completion. Alabama only allows 6.19 yards per attempt and 10 yards, almost 11 per completion. Georgia has thrown 7 interceptions, meaning one about every 57 attempts, or about one every game and a half, game and a quarter. Interceptions made, Alabama 12, the same as Georgia. They intercept the ball once every 30 attempps. On average, you can see that Georgia attempts 33. We'll see what happens. Sacks given up. Georgia is good at protecting the quarterback. They love Carson Beck. They don't like people messing with them. They're number 6 in the nation, only giving up 10 sacks. Alabama, on the other hand, number 9 in the nation in getting to the quarterback. They've sacked the quarterback 36 times. We'll see what happens there. Passing efficiency is great for Carson Beck, 72%. Alabama, very similar to Georgia's number on the defense, only allows 58% passing efficiency. Now let's switch to running the ball. Alabama's ranked number 44 in the nation, rushing. Georgia's defense, 26. Alabama runs almost twice as much as they pass. Georgia's at 40 rushes per game. Georgia's used to seeing 34. Yards per game, not awesome. Alabama gains 178 yards per game rushing. Georgia only gives up 118. Yards per attempt, roughly 4.5 for Alabama. Georgia gives up 4. Fumbles lost, 4. Good number given how many times Alabama's rushed the ball. Georgia's only ever recovered 1 fumble. That's this year. That's ranked dead last in the NCAA, number 130 at recovering fumbles. Alabama's fumble rate, they can expect to put the ball on the ground once every 119 attempts or once every 3 games. Georgia's fumble taken rate is once per 355 attempts. Turnovers are going to be key in this game. Again, let's switch sides and look at the Georgia rushing offense against the Alabama rushing defense. Georgia's ranked number 30 in the nation, only 186 yards per game, so you can see the bandwidth is really tight. That's almost the exact number that Alabama averages. Alabama's rush defense is ranked number 33, giving up 128 yards per game. Georgia tries to rush the ball 35. Alabama's used to their opponents rushing at 34. And Bama's numbers would be a lot better had they not gone up against Jaden Daniels. Georgia hasn't faced him. He rushed for a couple hundred yards almost against the Alabama defense. And Auburn pretty much gashed Alabama when it came to rushing. Georgia gets 5.25 yards per rush attempt, which is really good. Alabama gives up 3 3/4 roughly. Georgia's put the ball on the ground 6 times. Alabama has recovered 5. Fumble rate for Georgia is once every 71 carries, or roughly 1 every 2 games. The fumble taken rate for Alabama is 1 per 81 opponents' rushing attempts. Take a quick look at special teams. Kickoff return average 19 for Alabama, 25 for Georgia. Alabama covers the ball very well on kickoffs. I don't expect that to be a factor for either team. The punt yards per attempt are roughly the same at 10.25 for Alabama, 10.5 for Georgia. Field goal percentages are very, very close, 18 for 21 at 86% for Bama. 20 for 23 or 87% for the Bulldogs, and the average net punting yards pretty good at 42, exactly the same for both teams. What are the key matchups? Alabama's got to protect Jalen Milroe. He proved against many teams, especially Auburn last week, if you give him time, he's going to drop a dime. I'm a poet and don't know it. Georgia has lackluster sacking. They're tied for 66th in the nation. Chances are Milroe's going to have time to either drop that dime or pick out a lane and hurt Georgia with his feet. The Georgia third down efficiency, number 2 in the nation, they are awesome, versus the Alabama third down defense, which is a great third down defense, but it's not awesome. Definite advantage to Georgia. Georgia pass offense versus the Bama pass D. We're going to wait and see what happens here, but definitely by the numbers, the advantage for Georgia. Will Alabama be able to get to the Georgia quarterback? Will they be able to pressure Carson Beck? That remains to be seen. That's why they play the game. Which leads to the next point. The key matchup is the protection of Carson Beck versus the sack-heavy defense of Alabama. That's going to be an advantage for Alabama. Both teams have keys to victory. I think Alabama needs to do a little more to win this game, so they have 5 keys to victory versus Georgia's 4. The first one for Bama is pressure cooker. Attack Beck or he'll fillet your defense. Beck is the offense. Third is not first. Obviously, you got to stop Georgia on third down. If they continue with their 57% first down rate from third down conversion, then it's going to be a long game for Alabama. Georgia will possess the ball for 33 minutes, like their average says they will. Which leads to number 3. Alabama has to be the exorcist. They have to free the ball from Georgia possession. And turn over a new leaf. Georgia's very, very poor. That's the one spot they're poor at, their turnover margin. Alabama, to win this game, must win the turnover battle. They must create turnovers. They must protect the ball. And there's no fail-safe here. Penalties, turnovers, they can't self-destruct. On the other side of the ball, Georgia, what are their keys to victory? Well, you got to ensure your valuables. Protect Carson Beck. He's your offense. If Bama gets to Carson Beck, it's going to be a very long day for the Georgia Bulldogs. Greed is a virtue, at least in football. 33 minutes per game, average time of possession. If you can do that against Bama, you have a good chance of winning this game. Lords of discipline. Bama tends to self-destruct when it comes to penalties, not when it comes to turnovers, but definitely penalties. Georgia, maintain your relatively penalty-free lifestyle, and you'll have a great chance to win this game. Private eye. You've got to spy Milroe, but then you also have to put pressure on them. So it's and you have to cover the receivers. Alabama has some good receivers. Georgia has some great receivers. Spy Milroe, or he's going to hurt you with his feet. So let's look at the line. I don't really see how Vegas came up with this one. 5.5, Georgia's favored. Some sites, Georgia is favored by as much as 6 points, and you can see the over-under of the spreads there. Matchup predictor from ESPN, it's roughly a toss-up. Given the odds, Georgia wins this matchup 52% of the time, and the 20,000 ESPN computer simulations and the computer application is only as good as the code that goes into it. Believe me, I know. 48% of the time, Alabama wins the game, so it's almost a toss-up. Game time weather forecast, this is an easy one. It's going to be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There's not going to be any wind noise to worry about for kicking or passing. There isn't any temperature considerations. It's going to be a comfortable game for the fans, depending, I guess, on how well their teams do. What do I think is going to happen? It may shock you. I think Alabama's going to take this one. Alabama tends to do well in grudge matches against Tennessee, Texas A&M, Ole Miss. When they've been disrespected the year before, and LSU, disrespect Alabama the year before, they're coming at you with everything they've got. Alabama felt disrespected last year. They were number 5 in the playoff rankings. A TCU, very weak team, was put in ahead of them. The two patsies from the Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan, were put in ahead of them. Two of those teams lost big late in the year. In fact, TCU got spanked by a team Alabama at the end of the year that Alabama spanked in the bowl game. So they felt disrespected. The championship did not go through Tuscaloosa last year. Usually happens in the SEC. Alabama feels disrespected. They're going to come out hard. They're going to score points. They're going to score touchdowns and field goals. Georgia will score touchdowns and field goals, but not at the same rate as Alabama. I think Alabama puts Carson Beck on the ground, or they rush him, or they hit him pretty hard when they do get to him. And I think it's going to throw off the passing game. When you throw off the Georgia passing game, there's not a lot left for them to fall back on. Alabama did that with LSU. The Georgia passing game is not quite as efficient as LSU's was. I think that Alabama takes the game. I don't know how else I can say it. Carson Beck is not Jaden Daniels. He does not run the ball. He averages 2.5 yards a carry. If Alabama can cover the receivers, they don't need a spy. They put Carson Beck on his back. It's going to be a long day for Georgia. 27-23 Alabama, not meaning to insult anybody or disrespect anybody. It's just what I think is going to happen by the numbers. I appreciate you watching, and I would appreciate a like and subscribe. Helps me, helps my family. Here's praying that all the players make it through safely and with their health intact, that all the fans get to the game safely, get home safely, don't speed. Don't take any chances. 52 degrees there in Atlanta. Cheers.
We're going to have a little excitement.